Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CPAC Live. Today we have a great show. We have the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who continues to be a very important voice as America faces all these challenges. And we're also going to have the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Eric Hargan, someone who's been on the show before. We'll get an update from Eric on the fight against Chinese corona and all the things the Trump administration is doing to try to streamline the process to getting to a vaccine. But first, I wanted to just start the show and really applaud what Secretary Betsy DeVos and the president are doing in terms of opening up the schools. As you know, Mercy and I have 5 children, and they're each a gift from God, but that gift can get a little old when you spend each and every moment of the day together. As we know, liberals only like one kind of homeschooling, the kind when they can mandate it. And they mandated it on all of us families. And in my particular case, we both have busy professional careers, and we're trying to teach tender kids how to read and do math. And quite honestly, we need to be honest with ourselves. We couldn't do it all, and our kids are slipping behind. And the public schools in Fairfax County, right outside the swamp, they couldn't even literally get online school to work for months. And those kids fell further behind the private schools that were able to get their act together better. I would applaud the schools my kids are in. They happen to be Catholic schools for the job they did, but it still is not what our kids need, and it's not what we choose for them. And what Betsy DeVos said last night with Tucker Carlson, that they're going to use potentially federal resources to really encourage these schools to open up, is the right thing. And when the liberals come running at us and the socialists come running at us, they say, how outrageous. You're urging opening up schools in the middle of a pandemic. Take a breath and go to the CDC and go to Dr. Robert Redfield, who said, please don't use any guidance from the CDC as a reason to not open up all schools and to have kids be on campus for schools, not 2 days a week, but each and every day. As a matter of fact, they should probably even go a little extra because we've all lost so much time. So don't let people say that somehow the medical community is against opening up schools, because as we know, if you look at who gets infected and who's at the at-risk groups, young people are the furthest away from that you can get. I also would advocate, if a parent is worried because you have a health condition in your family, Skype in, just like we're doing on this show. There's all kinds of technology at our fingertips. Let's use it. I also thought it was great that the American Pediatric Association came out and said the best thing for kids is for them to have the option to go to school in person. Once again, homeschool families have done a tremendous job. Matter of fact, their scores are always better than those of us who don't homeschool. So our hats are off to them. It's a choice that they make. That's what a free society is all about. People should also have the choice to be able to say, no, I think my kids learn better in another way. We should not use bogus reasons to prevent those of us who want to put our kids in a school from being able to have that option. So 3 cheers for Betsy DeVos and for the president in urging the states and the localities to open up. And so now we're going to get on with our first guest, who's someone who's a very close friend of CPAC, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich. Newt, great to have you on the show.
Oh, it's good. Wonderful to be back with you.
Now you got to tell us where are you calling from? Where are you joining us from?
I'm I'm talking to you from Rome, where Callista is the ambassador to the Vatican, and where we spent 10 weeks in very tight lockdown at the peak of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And things are now dramatically better here, and offer me hope that America will reopen restaurants, museums, hotels. They're even starting to reopen movie theaters. So things have improved dramatically, but they spent a very tough 10 weeks and really worried about whether the country was going to be able to deal with the scale of the pandemic.
Did you know people who died during this pandemic in Italy?
No, not personally, I didn't. We have friends of friends who've died, but
Right.
We didn't know anyone directly.
And do you think that
And by the way, the embassy, there are 3 embassies here for the U.S., one to the Vatican, one to Rome, and one to the Food and Agriculture Organization. And they have, I think, about 600 employees. None of them got the virus. I mean, there was a very serious effort to be very careful.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the all the images we saw out of Italy, the experience you were living, it's a demonstration that the medical community has learned a lot about how to treat the virus as well.
Yeah, well, and Italy was a unique situation because, first of all, they have 100,000 Chinese workers in northern Italy, and they were flying directly in from Wuhan. And so the virus got very intense in the area around Bergamo and Milano. Second, the Italian system is not robust enough. They have some very, very good hospitals, but they don't have enough depth. And so they got to a point where they were triaging people. If you were over 80, they basically said, we're not going to treat you. We hope you survive, but we're not going to provide any resources. As you'll remember, when Governor Cuomo thought New York was moving in that direction, President Trump moved a Navy hospital ship,
Right.
4 Army field hospitals, and they took over the Javits Center and built a 1,200-bed hospital. So no place in the U.S. has had anything like the per capita problem that Italy had in northern Italy. It was very tough, and Callisto worked very closely with Franklin Graham, and his Samaritan's Purse organization flew an entire hospital in, 68 beds, 60 doctors and nurses, and provided emergency care in the most difficult and hardest hit part of Italy. So they were very grateful for that kind of American charity.
So typical of you, during this and even previous to this, you took your pen in your hand and you wrote yet another bestseller, Trump and the American Future, which people can purchase at Amazon if you want to go to Amazon, or you can go to your website, which we'll put on the screen so people can also know how to get all the information that they need from Newt Gingrich. Why did you write this book, and why is it important to people now?
Well, I sat down about November of last year and I thought, this is going to be the most important election, I think, since Lincoln's re-election in 1864. Had Lincoln lost, the Democrats would have allowed the South to secede. So it was truly an extraordinary moment in American history. And I think what you're seeing now between Biden, Pelosi, Schumer, and the anti-American left, the gap between what they would do and what President Trump would do is so enormous. And you could see it if you simply took President Trump's speech, which I thought was magnificent at Mount Rushmore, the best speech of its kind since Ronald Reagan at Westminster in 1982. Take that speech and compare it with Biden's anti-American 4th of July speech, which is the most anti-American speech ever given by a presidential candidate. And just look at those two and say, which country do I want to live in? Because it's clear if the left wins, they're going to impose a totalitarian mind control that if you say the wrong things, you'll be punished, you'll lose your job. And once they have control of the government, you may well face other consequences. So I think this, and I wanted to write a book, which is why I wrote Trump and the American Future, so everybody who is for Trump could get the facts, the evidence, the context, and be capable of talking with their neighbors, despite the propaganda media, and getting across what's really at stake and who the other team really is.
And you obviously, you're co-chairman of Catholics for Trump. You have been somebody who has been advising the president since he ran for president in 2016. And you're an important voice because not only does the president listen to your advice, but you have millions of people in the country and across the world who are listening to you. And I thought a phrase out of your book was incredibly important because they're trying to indoctrinate us with this idea that America is akin to systematic racism. But you say it's not systematic racism that's the problem. It's systematic anti-Americanism, which was punctuated by that Joe Biden speech. What do you mean by that phrase?
Well, look, I think when you face, for example, the city of Chicago had 18 Americans killed in one day. Between Chicago and New York last weekend, there were 152 people, Americans, shot. And what you get out of the mayor of Chicago and the mayor of New York is a total unwillingness to side with law and order, to side with the police. So, and I have a chapter in my book, the Democrats love criminals and hate police.
Right.
Now, that to me is a good example. We're a country where you're supposed to be safe. One of the major purposes of forming the government was safety. And by the way, if you're going to have a period of lawlessness, the The people who get hurt are the poor, the weak, those who can't protect themselves. So you had an 8-year-old girl in Atlanta shot. You had a
Yep.
7-year-old girl in Chicago shot. And left-wingers don't do anything about it. The mother in Atlanta said, my daughter was not killed by a policeman. My daughter was killed by people in the community. And it's clear that the organizers of Black Lives Matter haven't paid any attention to the Americans getting killed unless it's to their political advantage and fits their political story. So I think we just have the guts to tell the truth, and let's argue it out.
Yeah, so true. And also, as you speak there from the seat of the Catholic Church in Rome, with your wife as the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, in the midst of all of this, really historic, negative dynamics going on in our society here, the role of the church and of faith becomes paramount. In the middle of all this, we closed our churches. We almost made it seem like it was the wrong thing or unhealthy to go to church. What's the role of the church and faith as we try to stare down these challenges?
Well, historically, I think, and this is where we need, frankly, more militant church leaders. Historically,
Amen, amen, Newt, amen.
The church historically was a centerpiece of resisting this sort of thing.
Right.
I found it very troubling when you'd have left-wing governors who would say, marijuana stores are vital, but churches aren't. Planned Parenthood performing abortions is vital, but churches aren't. And it told you their anti-faith secular viewpoints. And I thought it was horrifying, frankly. When you have churches the size of the Basilica in Washington, where Callista sang for 20 years, that church can easily hold 1,000 people within the framework of social distancing, because it can hold 3,000 to 5,000 people, depending on, like, Easter and Christmas are up about 5, but a big Sunday they'll be at 3. So the idea that they were going to be limited to 0, which they were, and then the mayor was going to relent and allow them to have 10. I mean, this is madness. And the fact that the rest of us put up with it and don't say it's madness allows it to get worse and worse, and allows the system to get sicker and sicker.
And then you have these, the people who run Black Lives Matter saying that we're going to smash stained glass windows, we're going to take down the statues of Jesus and his mother. They've been ripping down statues of Saint Junipero Serra. I mean, we need more church leaders to stand up and say, this must stop.
Right, and frankly, the way historically, the last great wave of left-wing totalitarianism was 1967 to 72, when there were 2,500 bombings in the United States. And the way that ended was really simple. We arrested people and put them away. And sooner or later, we're going to have to go out and arrest people and put them away. Not just the politicals, but they need 3 or 4 times as many police on the south side of Chicago. I mean, so the south side of Chicago has been a devastatingly dangerous place for poor African Americans for at least 30 years now. And nobody does anything about it, because as long as it stays on the south side, nobody in the Chicago power structure cares. But they're American citizens. And in the 1960s, John F. Kennedy sent the FBI into Mississippi to track down people who had killed young Americans who were civil rights workers. Well, at some point in the not distant future, the president's going to have to consider whether or not killing an American citizen in a place that has no law requires using the FBI to protect your right to live. I mean, how can we talk about the Constitution applying to you if you can be randomly shot? And I think this is a huge crisis. And I think we ought to say to all of these Democratic mayors, remember, Chicago, last Republican mayor is 1931. For 89 years, Democrats have mismanaged Chicago. And I think we ought to say to them, if you don't get crime under control, you should expect to see the FBI and others in your neighborhoods tracking down the criminals. And when we find them, they're going to go away for a long time. Now, again, I help sponsor Right on Crime. I'm a big advocate that if you're a peaceful person, we need to think of much more humane ways to deal with you. But if you're a violent predator, my answer is to get you off the street until you're too old to prey on anybody.
Yeah, and as you know, we do a lot of work on criminal justice reform here at the ACU as well. And I do think your political point, which is embedded in there as well, is awfully important. It was one of the reasons why Chicago doesn't get the scrutiny it deserves, which could actually, if it got the scrutiny, you could get the political change to save kids' lives. But they don't do that because these Democrats and now socialists that run Chicago, they get the cover treatment from the national news and the local news. And as a matter of fact, the mayor of Chicago just said the other day that it was racist for the president to try to act like people are unsafe in Chicago in the midst of people being murdered literally every day. And some of the bloodiest weekends we've seen in our peacetime history in this country.
You know, I think conservatives ought to really consider creating a third party in these big cities that's simply a safety party that says everybody who's tired of being frightened, everybody who's tired of having children shot, let's all get together and throw out the people who clearly have failed to protect us. And I think it'll be very interesting. I think the left-wing Democrats would find it very frightening to say. I mean, it's impossible right now for Republicans to compete in a place like Chicago, but it would be very possible, I think, for a third-party candidate running purely on safety. I'm going to do everything it takes to make the city safe, which Giuliani did brilliantly in New York. I mean, people forget in '93 he was elected in part because people were so frightened and
That's
so
right.
fed up with this. And within a matter of 2 or 3 years, he changed the whole tone of the city.
Thanks for being with us, Newt Gingrich. Everyone go out and buy Trump and the American Future. You can get it on Newt's website or go to Amazon. I'm sure you can get it at probably almost every retail online bookseller. And remember, as Newt talks to us about the need to grab this issue because it'll save people's lives of public safety, that one of those men they want to rip off Mount Rushmore, Teddy Roosevelt, literally started his political career, I believe, as the police commissioner in New York City, cleaning up the bad neighborhoods. This is an issue that the Republicans have led on for a very long time, because in the end, liberalism is very impractical, right, Mr. Speaker?
Well, I mean, the truth is liberalism kills.
It does kill. Yeah, no, well said. Thank you for being with us. We hope to be able to have you back on the show. Keep up the great work
Love to do it.
in Rome, and please give our love to your wife.
We'll do it.
Thank you, sir. We're going to now go to a great clip of Ronald Reagan as he leaves the presidency, talking about his vision for America. We need this vision now more than ever. Watch this clip, and on the other side, we'll be with Secretary Eric Hargan from HHS.
The past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. He journeyed here on what today we'd call a little wooden boat. And like the other pilgrims, he was looking for a home that would be free. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still. And how stands the city on this winter night? More prosperous, more secure, and happier than it was 8 years ago. But more than that, after 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow is held steady no matter what storm.
Ronald Reagan is the voice that I always need to turn to in moments of crisis. I usually like to turn on Frank Sinatra in my car on Sirius XM radio and try to get a little chill. And if I can just get a little bit of Ronald Reagan's wisdom, it always puts me in a better place. And someone who definitely understands, I don't know if he's a Frank Sinatra fan, but I know he's a Ronald Reagan fan, is the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Eric Hargan. You're a great friend of CPAC. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, great to be here, Matt.
Could you have imagined when you agreed to go back into government? Obviously, you're a successful lawyer, you're in the Chicago area, and you go back into government to take this really important role. you couldn't have imagined what would unfurl in the country. And so we want to applaud you for your service, because people make great personal sacrifices in order to serve. And we're glad you're doing it.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would have anticipated what happened here. I mean, you look back on the last 6 months, 7 months at this point, and I mean, the entire script is flipped, as they say, about what we're doing in the country, particularly with regard to healthcare. So, I'm glad to be here to be able to provide service to the country, but it's not what anybody anticipated.
And you served in the Bush administration at the Department of HHS. You were a fellow here at ACU.
Yes.
You've been a voice in the conservative community and the conservative legal community for a long time. I bet you're using all and every ounce of that experience as we face the challenge of Chinese corona, coming up with a vaccine, and the rest of these challenges.
Yes, I mean, it's been a long time for me, even going back to my childhood, where I grew up underfoot in a rural hospital, Mounds, Illinois. Little town, about 800 people out in deep southern Illinois. So I'm glad I have all those experiences dating all the way back, frankly, to my childhood in healthcare. So drawing all of that, all that experience to be able to help to the extent I can with everything that everyone's going through in the country right now.
So you're also the parent of 2 boys and the father of 2 boys, and you like our family and so many millions of families across this country are being told it's unsafe by some people to send kids back to school in the fall. What is the president's approach on this, and what's your approach?
Well, we have to safely reopen these schools. I mean, the president has been very clear on that. It's not just a cost of going to school, it's cost of not going to school. I mean, people have to understand that there's a cost to these children to not being with other children. There's a cost to them. We have our, when we look at the cost to children, both to them and to their families, for them not only not being educated, but not being around other children. And there's a definite cost to them in terms of their mental health, their behavioral health, that accumulates over time. And I think, in the spring, people were thinking, we're coming to the end of the school year, and they could kind of sort of tide it out through the end of the school year. But I think it's going to be a much more serious decision for everybody in terms of trying to keep children out, not just for them, but for their parents, for being able to reopen the economy. Because in many ways, a lot of parents who need to get back into the workforce and who want to get back in the workforce, it's a condition for them that their children are able to get back to school physically and not be at home.
Look, we're dads, and my guess is most of the burden falls on moms who are working and also trying to learn how to be teachers. And as a friend of ours often says, you also have to learn to be the lunch lady too, which she says with some humor. But the fact is that doing that for a sustained period of time is untenable for the majority of families. And I think a lot of moms and working moms out there who aren't that political are saying, please, if there's a serious health issue, tell me. If there's not, let me take the minimal risks in order to get the great positives of getting my kids to smile again and to get good tests, et cetera. So,
people need to look at the whole health issue involved here. It's not just, they need to look at the characteristics of this virus, about the potential effects on children, and about whether or not, there's about what the risk is, honestly. And I think that's where both the school administrators, the teachers, and everyone needs to educate themselves about the characteristics of the virus, what the risk is, and what the risk is to not going back to school. This isn't a free decision to say, I'm going to keep the kids home. That's not a free decision. And I'm not just talking about from the economic point of view, but from the health point of view.
It's almost like no other time in our history have we needed to use logic and try to not feed into the panic. And as we all know, thank God, this is just not a virus, unlike H1N1 or other viruses we've had to struggle that really kind of impacts children so aggressively. And Eric Hargan, I've had a lot of people whisper in my ear throughout this process on hope on a vaccine, on really great progress that's being made in treatments. I think the medical community has already gone a long way in figuring out how to treat this virus better. But you have this Operation Warp Speed, which you guys are taking the lead on to really jump ahead on the progress on a vaccine and other treatments. Can you give us a quick update on what
Yeah.
you're doing?
Sure. I mean, we've got a lot of encouraging progress so far on vaccines, on therapeutics, meaning the things that you might take if you get infected, those therapeutics that might help cure you or mitigate the disease. But we've got a lot of encouraging progress on vaccines. I mean, we're sort of progressing on all fronts. Part of the innovation that we're doing is that, while the research and development is going forward with the scientists and the medical experts, we're also getting the manufacturing started and the distribution channels set up so that when and if, God willing, we get a vaccine that's safe and effective, we can move relatively swiftly to getting that manufactured and then distributed to the American people. So some of the innovation here is actually on the system side, where we're kind of proceeding on all fronts. So teams are working on all fronts on this. And that was one of the innovations that the president called for from us to be able to put in place. So that's a thing I think that people don't understand. We're kind of working on all fronts, and so hopefully when we get good signs, and we've got encouraging signs, I'm going to say, on all fronts with regard to vaccines, therapeutics, and new diagnostics. Really, our industry, our scientists, the innovative sector of the economy has really
let me go to that.
Done exceedingly well.
The idea of having a private medical market that's dominated by private companies has really come under attack. Everybody wants this Medicare for all, and there's all this socialist complaining about that. If we had had a federal socialized response in our medical community, it would have been better. But the fact is, we've gotten to testing faster, and I think the testing has to get even much better. We're going to get to vaccines and, as you say, therapeutics much faster because we have a vigorous private sector, diverse pharmaceutical and medical community.
It's utterly ridiculous to think that we could have solved this with a government-only approach. This had to focus on innovation, and innovation is a characteristic of a private sector.
Of course.
I mean, the fact that we have all of these different companies, all of these different ideas to be able to be launched at the same time is incredibly important. This could not have been done if we had moved to a system that is directed by government. We'd be looking at one solution. We'd be looking at one or two solutions. Instead, we've got dozens to choose from to be able to launch a lot of different projects at the same time. That would never have been possible if we didn't have a private sector, and not only that, a healthy private sector in the medical area. That otherwise this wouldn't be happening. We'd be in a completely different and far worse situation.
And Secretary Hargan, whoever comes up with a vaccine or revolutionary therapeutic, there'll be a benefit to them in the market when they do that, both from a prestige and brand perspective. All of us will have greater respect for the researchers and for the company who bring this product to market. And there'll be a financial benefit to that as well. And that'll also help drive, I think, all these supply chain issues that people are worried about, because I think it'll come from a free market, whether that's Israel or America or other freedom-loving economies.
Yeah, and that's where it's going to come from. I mean, that, and not only that, you're going to see the benefits accrue to them, not just financially, but as you say, in terms of the long-term, hopefully the long-term understanding on the part of people that this could not have been done without a healthy free enterprise system that incentivizes people to prepare new solutions, innovative solutions that really decentralized our approach to this problem. If we had had a one-size-fits-all approach to this, if we had had one only solution, any mistake that's made by the central government in responding means that it's a mistake the entire society makes. We couldn't have had that approach. We have to have taken an approach that really is a decentralized, private sector focused approach. That means we don't just put our bets down on one group or one government being able to make the right decision. Instead, we were able to turn to a healthy, vigorous private sector that had a lot of different ideas. And we're able to put our bets down on a lot of different ideas. And, we've got encouraging signs, but it's multiple. encouraging signs. It's not just one company; it's multiple companies
And
that are coming forward.
And also the fact is we're kind of rejiggering our approach to how we look at this globally. Obviously, the president and his administration announced the fact that we're, I guess, putting a bit of a pause on the World Health Organization, the fact that they have been wrong so tragically over and over again, and seeming to be more in collusion with the communists in China than with the government of Taiwan. And so through your leadership and leadership of Alex Azar, that's shifting.
Yeah, I mean, the World Health Organization has a great history. It has a lot of great resources available to it. I think it's really unfortunate that the kind of reforms that we and others have been calling for have not yet been embraced by the WHO. And so the president had to make that decision to start pulling us out of the World Health Organization. I mean, I think hopefully this is a wake-up call to an organization that has been around for decades, that has done a lot of great work in the past, that has a lot of smart, really good-hearted people working for it, but that needs a really fundamental relook at itself. It needs fundamental reform. And no one's exempt from this. We look at ourselves, at our response, and I think everybody does, and says, what could we do better? What are we going to reform about our own processes? And the WHO is not immune to this, but we just haven't seen the serious, I think, self-searching that we need to see from the WHO. And so the president had to make that decision. I hope that this inspires the WHO to take a long, hard look at itself. We're a primary funder of that organization. I hope this causes them to take a long, hard self-look and reform themselves.
And back on this question of what we're doing globally, what's the Taiwan angle here?
Well, that's kind of a subset of the issue. Taiwan had been barred from WHO meetings, and you look at Taiwan has had one of the most successful responses to this coronavirus outbreak. It's a model, and we've said all along, and everybody says viruses don't respect borders. We need to take a look at a country like Taiwan, and take a look at them and say, hey, what did you do right in this? Instead, everybody's just kind of looking the other way. They're saying they're acting like Taiwan doesn't exist, and I think that's a serious fault on the part of the international system. And so for WHO to kind of exclude Taiwan from this and not learn from them, not give them information, not include them in everything that they're doing, it's a political issue. It's not an issue dealing with fundamental healthcare issues, because we should include a country of tens of millions of people in our response, especially one that had a very good, thorough response to this that was very successful. Instead, everybody just kind of acts like they're not there. They act like they just look the other way. What's that? That's not realistic, and it's not helpful to the global response. So that's why we've called repeatedly for Taiwan to be included in this, in the WHO, to be included in these deliberations, and just not really sure why not. When we look at it, again, everybody in the medical area knows viruses don't respect borders. We have to take a look at these. We have to include everybody in these issues, and that's why it is and has been disappointing all along to see them excluded from this.
Right. Well, that should end, and we need to learn a lot, and all of us individually need to learn a lot as we're facing this challenge of talking to principals and pastors and public education administrators on opening up the schools. And this other question, which as we exit here and we let you go back to your incredibly important work there in the Department of Health and Human Services, where do people go to get the right information on this pandemic? It seems like when I turn on the TV, I just am disgusted after a few minutes by the panicky coverage, the inaccurate coverage. Where can we go to get information? Is it your website? Should we be tuning into what you say and Secretary Acosta and others, or what do we do?
So make sure you go to coronavirus.gov. I mean, that's the kind of assembly point that we put all of our information up on. So that has a lot of information on it. All of our guidances, all the latest and greatest that we have for the department. So yeah, just come to coronavirus.gov and that will have all the information from CDC and all of the other agencies that we have relevant. And yes, there's a lot of misinformation out there. That's something to be very, very careful of, because you get bad information about this. That is really a life and death issue for many of our citizens, especially the elderly, especially the medically frail. Those people who are most vulnerable in society, they really need to get the facts about what's going on. But it's not just them. Everybody, especially, and also those who aren't at risk, need to understand what the level is, that the level of risk that they are going to expect in society as we reopen, and kind of we're going back and forth in this issue. But people need to have a realistic idea about what the risk is that they're facing. The best information you're going to have, the most updated information that I know of, is actually on our website.
I like that. I'm going to start tuning in there every day. Eric Hargan, Deputy Secretary of HHS, thanks for joining us. And we want to thank everybody out there across the country. You're joining this show all the time. We're getting great feedback on it. It's a way for us all to be together. But don't worry, we're getting back on the road because we're checking out that website. We know that that's not unsafe to do. You can safely fly. You can safely come together. We can safely have a presidential campaign, which the Constitution mandates, by the way. That has to happen. So presidential candidates shouldn't be hiding out. And on the next show, we're going to have Ajit Pai, the chairman of the FCC, and we're going to have another great friend, Rich Lowry, the editor of the National Review. So join us on Friday, same time, same station. Go to our website, conservative.org. Watch us on our Facebook page. Watch us on Twitter, and watch us on Parler. I actually don't know if you can watch the whole show on Parler yet, but I have my handle. We're getting very active on Parler, which is actually a great new format for all conservatives and really all Americans, because they're just being fair, which is all we can ask within this great debates that we're having in our country. So go to Parler and start your account there. Thanks for joining us on CPAC Live. What a great show. Great to be with you. We'll see you Friday.